Cool. Okay, so it's just gone 2 o'clock, and yeah, so I think we'll probably look to get this webinar started. I will keep the joining instructions up on screen for a little bit because I can see a few people are still joining, which is really yeah, really great, and it's really great to see so many of you joining us today. So, as I was saying before, and for anyone that is just joining now, we will be using Meetoo throughout the webinar today. The joining instructions for that are on the screen at the moment. So if you go to web.meetoo.com or download the Meetoo app from the App Store, and then enter the meeting ID 150740299. You'll then be able to join the Meetoo session that we've got set up. We're primarily using the Meetoo session today for Q&A. So as we go through today's webinar, please feel free to submit any questions, any comments that you've got, and we do have a dedicated time at the end for answering those questions, but we may be able to answer some as we go through as well. Cool. Okay. So, as I say, thanks for everyone for joining us today. The webinar today is all about facilitating flipped learning through the use of interactive tools. And for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Joe Probert. I'm the Customer Success Manager for Education here at Meetoo. A lot of you may be familiar with my colleague Amy. Amy is currently on maternity leave, and the whole family is doing very well. So some of you may not have met me in person. So yeah, as I say, I'm Joe. I'm the Customer Success Manager for Education here at Meetoo. So, as I say, we'll be using Meetoo throughout the session for Q&A, and if anyone hasn't joined that session yet, it is the meeting ID for it is 150740299. Delivering today's webinar is Dr Nkaepe Olaniyi. She is a member of the physics department at Durham University, and she's going to be talking about threshold concepts and how the use of interactive tools such as Meetoo have aided her in the teaching of these through flipped learning. Nkaepe has been at Durham University, I think, since May this year, and then before that was an e-learning champion and a lecturer in physics at Leeds Beckett University. She's also a certified member of the Association of Learning Technologists, and we really enjoyed supporting her back at the ALT conference in September. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand you over to Nkaepe and make her the presenter so that she can share her presentation with you.
Right. Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks for that. It's good to see everyone. Well, sort of see everyone, but thank you so much for joining in. So yeah, I'm just going to walk you through my experience really of overcoming threshold concepts and using flipped learning in that sense. So just to crack through it, first of all, it would be, let's me get this up. Finding out, just making sure everyone understands what a threshold concept actually is. I've got a quote here from May and Land, who are very much the experts in this field, and it's just to specify the fact that a threshold concept is one that's core to any subject, and it's key to transforming the way a student understands the whole subject. So if they're struggling with that core concept, then the rest of the subject really won't make sense. And it's quite a difficult one because there are many in various subjects, and it's sometimes called troublesome because you're making a student basically leave behind some probably intuitive and basic understanding they have just to expand their knowledge a bit. So it's very mental and emotional discomfort is involved, so it's very emotional for them in a sense, but it's really the way to get them beyond just, as you see, I've put on Bloom's taxonomy there. So you want to get them beyond just remembering or memorizing and just understanding. Especially in HE, we're really keen to get to the higher echelons of learning, which involved analyzing the concept, evaluating it, and being able to create new ideas with it. So overcoming a threshold concept, especially in HE, is very, very key. So I'll just give you some examples of what threshold concepts could be like in a subject. And I had to go through some research journals just to get some examples. In economics, so there's cost of opportunity, concept of opportunity cost. In business, certain aspects of business finance, for example, the time value of money. I know I've struggled with that myself when I had to do an economics module. Biology, photosynthesis. Now that's an interesting one because I did see like it was a documentary a while back where some kids in this primary school had just learned about photosynthesis and how food is made using sunlight, only for one of the students to go back home in the garden with the mom. Oh, how do plants get their food? Oh, they get it from the soil. So threshold concepts can be very counterintuitive as well. Again, that's trying to break that barrier down can be quite difficult. In chemistry, we have enthalpy. In physics, I have to agree with this one. There's too many to count. Okay, so gravity is a quite an interesting example in the sense that you're trying to, especially when you're trying to explain to people that who are not very knowledgeable in physics, how someone accelerating would accelerate at the same rate as a feather. So weight or mass has nothing to do with how fast you accelerate from the top floor, for example, to the ground. So that's gravity. Maths, complex numbers poses a problem. So I would like to ask you, if you are teaching at the minute, how do you overcome threshold concepts at the minute? So basically, like we've said, anything that you think your students find troublesome or they find counterintuitive, how exactly have you tried to overcome this issue? So we've got a Meetoo poll open for that. So if you could put your responses in there, that would be great. Even if you're not teaching, maybe remember how you overcame a concept that you thought was really tricky whilst you were in education. So please feel free to put that in as well. So I'll just wait for some answers on that. Yeah, so I'd really like to know how, because my experience is just based on, well, what I'm going to talk about today is based on my experience, and that itself is based on what I wished had happened whilst I was at school. So it's usually one or the other, something you saw at school that thought, oh, that was really great, and therefore you copy it, or in my case, something which had happened when you were at school. So if you've got any examples of either one, that would be great to hear.
I'm going to, I'm going to close the poll
Okay.
now. Do you want me to put those results up on screen?
Yeah, if we can have those on the screen, that would be great.
Cool. I've pushed those out onto the app, Nkaepe.
Oh, okay, that's great. Right. So keep revising. Very great teacher, I like that. Repetition and real life examples. Exactly right. That was definitely the key part there, which is I'm going to look at that as well. Using practical examples to apply the theory, brainstorming, Q&A, debating, pre-lecture videos, really good. Students explaining them to each other. Giving examples usually helps, very much so. It's always good to have a real life example, especially in the sciences or in any subject actually, just to be able to put that concept firmly in your mind. Brainstorming, use of diagrams, also key. So thank you so much for that. Those are definitely what I expected to see. So there is a need, as one researcher said, for a mix of teaching approaches to be able to address the learning styles that you have in the class. You cannot escape that. So for me, flip lesson was the best way to do that because it encompassed a lot of what you've just mentioned. And like I said, some of the things I wish had happened in my experience. So obviously I'm not talking about an upside down class. It's basically, instead of being the sage on stage, being the guide on the side. And it's really making it more student-centered approach to their learning rather than teacher-centered one. So the emphasis, I did try and put an emphasis on self-assessment, and I'll show you what I mean as we go along. So some of my colleagues were not too keen on the fact that it's flipped learning because it does have its own issues. But if I sold it as enhanced pre-learning or enhanced active learning, that seemed to calm everyone down so far. So general components of a flip lesson. It has to have materials that are now ready outside the classroom for the students to learn. So they're not doing the learning in classroom, they're doing it outside at home. So the time that was used to do homework is now moved into the class. So at home, self-learning encourages remembering and understanding the lower echelons of the Bloom's taxonomy. And that should include self-assessment for them to be able to actually see that they've learned something. And in class, this is where the Q&A, debating, interacting with your peers should come in. So this peer interaction, student-teacher interaction, because now instead of focused on just teaching them this concept, I can now focus more on getting them to understand it more and apply it more. So problem-solving skills come in. So we're seeing more of the applying, analyzing, evaluating going on in class. So those are what a flip lesson should look like. But the question is, how does this actually help overcome a threshold concept? And Land, again, one of the core researchers in this field, says that the following things need to be addressed when you're delivering a course design to overcome a threshold concept or threshold or troublesome knowledge. There is a need for engagement. Students need to be able to explain it in different ways connected to their real lives, things that they see or experience. There is a need for peer assessment so that they can actually help discover the common difficulties they all face, common anxieties, because this will then open them up to a liminal space where they can actually be open to accept the new concept that you're trying to give them. And then there's a need for a recursive approach, so having different forms of material for them to choose how they want to understand this, and excursive, making it a journey. And that's the real thing with learning. It is a journey, and we have to try and encourage students to be able to say, you may not get it here and now, but you've opened up your mind to the fact that you need to understand something and then you need to carry on this journey. Don't leave it just for the exam, for example. So meta learning is also encouraged. So that's use of a learning process is the process that focuses their attention on their own learning. How well are they doing or not doing, and how does that compare to their peers, or can their peers actually help them in that context? So these are the things that I feel that flip learning actually does help address when it comes to troublesome knowledge or threshold concepts. So for me now, I just have to explain how Meetoo, because someone's asked the question, does Meetoo make it easier for you to see if students understand concepts? So as I go through my experience, you'll see where that comes into it, and hopefully that would answer your question. So my experience starts off with part one, which was the fact that I worked in a center which was attached to Leeds Beckett, teaching physics. And we had two cohorts. We have two cohorts in every year in that center. And the September cohort for 16-17 had a very poor exam performance, in particular one subject, which was thermodynamics. So out of having taught there for almost 3 years, I thought things have to change, especially in thermodynamics at least. So for the January cohort for that year, I decided to flip the lesson or flip the structure. There were about six less lectures to deliver over a course of a few weeks for this particular topic. So what happened was I gave them all the material to look at over the Easter holidays. But before they went off, I did give an initial lecture to introduce the topic and just explain why I was flipping the lesson and what I expected them to do over the holidays and what would happen when they come back. So at home, they had lesson notes, external sites, standard videos. I even created some interactive videos for them, and an online test for them to, again, self-assess. So the interactive videos were from YouTube, nothing I'd created because I didn't have time, but H5P was quite good in dealing with that. And in class, they came back after Easter, and we had activity sheets to work through. So in part two, this part actually is slightly different because now I introduced Meetoo. The reason for that was based on the feedback I got from the students. And again, I'll share that later on, which was they didn't quite know what exactly they were supposed to learn for particular parts of that topic. So even though they appreciated having to learn it at home and then having more time, especially with each other and me, to be able to understand how to apply the concepts, they really felt they needed to understand what their objectives were. Even though this is clearly stated on every slide, still, it needs to be put in a way that they could actually see that they were getting the right outcomes. So I decided to change the format slightly for the new academic year. So it's applied to the September 17-18 and the January 17-18 cohorts. So still thermodynamics, because like I said, I just wanted to make sure I got this right before I start rolling it out through the whole module. But this time there was no introduction lecture. I didn't try to explain key concepts or anything. I just went through the topic, what we'd be covering, what would happen in the next lessons when they come, because they weren't going on a break. They were just going to go straight into, after a week of seeing me, they would then go into the following week and start the activities and whatever else. So they had a week at home to go through the videos, files, links, and tests. And in class, I then used Meetoo to draw up guide questions. So these were questions that were looking at the learning outcome for particular aspects of the topic. So could they give me the first law of thermodynamics in terms of the three key components? Could they determine what a thermodynamic process where you expand the gas would look like for this particular first law of thermodynamics, things like that. So again, I was trying to get them to tick off the learning outcomes for themselves. So these guide questions, using Meetoo, we went through them in class, and we also went through activity sheets after everyone was able to understand, okay, right, I understand what this is, and therefore I can apply it. And once the class was over, the answers I then exported into an Excel file and put on the VLE for them to see in addition to their notes. So it was I thought it was quite a good thing for them to see their own answers rather than just the notes I'd given them or what they searched on the webs. So this was something that they or their peers had given as answers in class. And with those, if there were any wrong answers, I could still put them up for everyone to see on the screen, and we could discuss them as a class. So before this, someone's asked the question, how long have you been using Meetoo for this purpose? So this was just for the 2 years. Before that, I used Meetoo as a polling app, so just to make my classes more interactive. So I'm hoping to evolve this as time goes on, and you'll see more at the end of this. So in terms of what happened after, so my key point was to make sure that they have understood, and therefore that should translate into exam results. So for the September 2016 cohort, which was my feather that broke the camel's back kind of situation, only half of them attempted the 3 questions on this topic, and most gained less than half marks. So that was, as you can see, my frustration there, really wanting to change things. For the January cohorts, after giving this first trial, 81% did well in this section, and almost all of them actually, I think the same number actually passed the whole exam as a whole. The September 2017-18, where I changed it slightly, bringing the guide questions, they 89% did well. For the January cohort, even better, 93% did well on this topic. And in all these 3 cohorts, January 2016 to January 2017-18, they all did well in the exam as a whole. So it's actually in line with research that this form of flipped learning, if applied well, will boost exam scores and lower failure rates. So my initial thinking is they've actually grasped another form of revision skills just from going through a flipped lesson, which has helped them in the rest of the module. And for a lot of the students that did well in physics, they automatically did well in maths. So that was the key thing, because they always find physics harder than maths. Okay, so I did survey the students just to get their own feedback and how well it went. This was the first group, the January 16-17 group. So I surveyed them well into the second semester after they'd had their exam, after they'd got their results, and they were just about to the point where they were more or less forgetting the flipped lesson. So I didn't want them to completely forget. So I asked them if they felt they learned thermodynamics well from that flipped lesson. And as you can see, most of them strongly agreed that yes, it was a very good thing. In fact, altogether, we have got about almost 90% of them saying they agree that it was a good way to learn thermodynamics. For the 17-18 cohorts, I did the surveys at different times, again, just to see if they were actually going on a proper journey or realizing they were in a journey. So for the first part, that was well after the exams, after their results, everybody was happy. The September cohort for 17-18, I did the poll after exams, but before they got their results. I had already marked them, so I knew that they had done very well. Well, as you can see from this, They weren't too sure. So there was a lot of doubt, 41% strongly disagreeing that they had learned much from the flip lesson on thermodynamics. But as I said, their exam results were superb, so I know they had. But again, the doubts were there. And then for the January cohort, I did this a week after the flip lesson, and they were genuinely happy as well. Everything was fine. So you can see that there is a journey that the students have to take. So I, that's why this method does need a bit of enhancing, just to make sure that they are following that process. For the guide questions and in particular using Meetoo, I asked how they found that in both the September and January cohorts, and they were quite happy with that. I put the two cohorts together in the decision, so more than half of them agreeing that yes, they found the guide questions useful. And one of the students actually came up to me and said it was quite useful to see everybody's comments on the VLE rather than just my notes as to definitions and things like that. So just to review my own experience, there is an initial dislike from students. Like I said, it is an emotional process when you're trying to get them to overcome a threshold concept, laying down what they actually know or think they know. So there's a dislike for it, and there's an understanding that there is a need for self-directed learning. So the way someone's asked, how do you deal with that initial skepticism? The way I did it was just to show them the exam results. I said, look, this is what people got, and we've done this format for the last 3 years, so at least it was a year before me, where people did the same thing and people were not getting it. So I need to change it. So that January, the first group I did that with, were quite happy. So by the time I came to the next cohorts and I could compare and contrast, that was fantastic. I had no opposition after that. They couldn't argue with the numbers. Um, Students who didn't complete the activity. So part one, peer pressure just played a big part. You could see it when they all came back from the Easter holidays. Some people had handwritten notes, others didn't. But by the time they came for the next lesson, the ones that didn't have handwritten notes suddenly had handwritten notes, and they were all, involved in conversation. So peer pressure, being able to have that peer interaction, not just me telling them off for not doing the work, they just had to get into it. Same thing for where the guide questions played a part. Having that group discussion on the questions before I threw up the answers on the board, again, highlighted lack of preparation. By the time we had the next class, they were more prepared. So that peer interaction is really important. It does take time to prepare, but like I've shown, the outcomes are worth it. The use of surveys would be good because I only give snippets as to what they might be thinking. So if I could have structured interviews, that probably would have been a lot better to just assess if deep learning has taken place. So as you can see, there is a need for good organization and implementation to be able to actually get the real effects of a flipped classroom. Okay, so final thoughts from the students, just some word answers to what they thought. They liked the fact that it was that particular topic we had to cover because they were fine with all the other topics, and they liked the fact that they had the time to go through it. Meetoo was mentioned. Like I said, they were used to Meetoo already, but to have it in the sense where they could have these questions and see each other's ideas, and they had the videos. Some other comments I had, I'll just read out briefly. Taking responsibility for my own learning, get more information and ideas from my classmates. So that was really good. Interactive, making sure I understood the topic correctly after looking at the slides of the lecture. So this is after going through the work, come back in and they're actually getting to understand what they're doing. Having a chance to participate. I got to be self-independent and more confident when teaching myself a topic. So that's the thing. It's almost like instilling a joy for learning, as it were. These were some of the comments where they wanted more support, so more research sources, more questions, more seminars. One or two saying, please just teach the traditional way, which is fine. There's no way you can please everyone on this. But again, like I said, they couldn't argue with the stats, and they themselves, one of the students who actually made that comment actually came and said, I didn't really like it, but at least I understood it. So you do get, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, right, I'll just do it anyway, even if you don't like it. But at least they saw the results. So I do want to suggest a new format just to enhance it, and it's based on, again, some research I've seen and my own experience. So I would have a test before the session, in that introductory session, where we would have no showing of the answers, either in class or online, either way. But in that introductory session, it'd be an exploration of a topic using a question that they could actually discuss and just expose any current or prevalent thinking, just so that they're a bit more open to what the intuition is and what's maybe the wrong ideas actually, or even if they have the right ideas, why is it? Then we'd have the flipped lesson split. So before class, they'd have the videos, the slides, reading material. I would actually put the guide questions before class, actually make it available online for them to use as part of their self-assessment, just not just the test. So again, they could then post answers on Padlet or something else, depending on how creative you want them to be. And then in class, we would review those answers and then still have some more question answer sessions using Meetoo, because like I said, they did like the fact that they were able to interact, especially the quieter students, being able to ask questions rather than raising their hands or trying to shout over somebody else or something like that. Especially if they're quieter or more timid. That really, I cannot stress how good that tool is really for them. And then we'd carry out group activities, worksheets, games, based learning, anything just to get that peer and teacher interaction going. So then after that, we could then repeat the test and share the answers as part of a group discussion. And hopefully having a before and after picture would help them in that journey. So when they're actually looking, when you're actually asking them the questions and trying to get their opinions afterwards, you won't have that dip where they think, no, I've done really badly. They can actually see proof actually they did learn. And hopefully that will translate to the exam and hopefully for the rest of the module and other modules. Right, and that is me actually, so thank you very much. I think we do have some questions on there.
Cool. Thank you for that, Nkaepe. Oh, turn my camera on. Yeah, thank you so much for for sharing that and for for answering the sort of some of those questions as we went along. I hope that everyone found that really interesting. I certainly did. It's now, so we've got a bit of time now at the end for some Q&A. There are a few questions that have come in. I don't think we kind of answered as we went through, so I'll kind of go through those now. But if anyone has got any questions, feel free to sort of pop them over. So we got a question. We've got a question here from John. He's asked, do you find students will prepare more knowing that the class will be more of a discussion?
Actually, yes, that was the case in all three cohorts. The first cohort, they brought in their handwritten notes, and so when they were going through the questions, they didn't even bother looking at the slides I had prepared. They were just looking at their own notes and any other information that they'd got. So and for all the other cohorts as well, they had their own notes and everything else. So I do think they do come in a bit more prepared, and even those who aren't, once they've had that first session, come back more prepared. Yeah.
Cool. And then another question here from Tim. Were the guide questions available before class?
Okay, for that first time I've done it, no, they weren't. So I only put them up in class. But like I've said, for the new format, I would rather have them before class, and then we can discuss it in class before we start off all the activities, or add some more questions to that. I think that would be ideal, actually. Yeah.
Cool. And then another question here from Monica. Was the repeat test exactly identical to the pre-lesson one?
That again would depend on yourself, how you'd like to structure it. For me, I would keep it the same, but maybe, especially if it's multiple choice, obviously change the order of the question so it's not as if they can just give the same answers. But yeah, I would like to keep it identical so that they do have a good before and after picture of themselves and how they've gone through a journey, a learning journey.
Brilliant, cool. Are there any other questions in there, Nkaepe, that?
Okay, well, what was student feedback like since you introduced the approach and utilizing Meetoo for clarification? So like I said, the student feedback was really positive. Like I said, one of the students who made the comment of teaching the traditional way, I didn't know it was him. He just came up to me and said, I don't really like this lesson, but I learned something. So it's good. So you're there thinking, okay, then that's fine. Because it is uncomfortable trying to think you're letting go of your intuition and someone's telling you that's not right, this is why it's not right. You think, but that doesn't make sense. And, well, actually, it needs to happen.
Cool. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, so I appreciate it's now, we're now just gone past. We only set aside half an hour for this, so I don't want to sort of keep anyone that might have a, any other appointment. So what I've just done is I've just opened up a feedback survey within Meetoo. So within that now, there's the option for people to give us some feedback on these webinars. We want these webinars to be, really valuable resources for, for our education customers and clients such as yourselves. And, we really hope that that's what we're delivering. So any feedback, any guidance, any kind of steering that you can give us on that would be really, really appreciated. We haven't sort of finalized our kind of webinar schedule for next year, but it's very much in our kind of conversations at the moment. So yeah, any feedback you can give would be great. And actually, anyone watching in who thinks that they've got an interesting subject and the use case of Meetoo that they would like to share with us and share with our education audience, we'd really love to hear from you as well. So yeah, feel free to get in touch with us about that. Cool. Okay. I think, as I say, we're now at past, so I'm probably going to wrap it up there. We'll keep the meeting open, so feel free to sort of submit any questions, anything that we haven't been able to answer. We'll attempt to answer and get back to you as by way of follow-up. You will get sent the recording of this webinar afterwards, so if anyone joined late and missed the beginning, you will get that as well. But Nkaepe, thank you very much for sharing that and for joining us today. It was really fascinating, and I hope everyone else found it really, really interesting and useful as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. I'm going to end that there.